Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Cake Diaries. So this is the first episode where we are doing video. I am super excited. It's a little bit scary because I'm not used to it. Like the whole point of being able to film with no video means that I can literally do it anywhere. Doesn't matter what I look like, I can film these podcasts whenever I want. So this is the first time that I'm actually having to make myself presentable, so you'll be glad to know that I actually made an effort. I'm wearing the merch, which you can get at sweetthingsbyamy.co.uk, and we're going to be talking about these assumptions that you guys sent in. I haven't had time to do it sooner than this, but it was about a week and a half ago, so if you sent them in on Instagram, then you may find that yours is being answered today. I'm going to make this a regular thing because I think people quite like hearing my answers to these. So fingers crossed you enjoy. If you don't already, and especially if you're listening on YouTube, make sure you go and subscribe to the podcast on Spotify. You can go and follow on there, and then you'll be notified every time I upload another one. And if you want to continue to watch the podcast as well as listen to it, then make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and then you'll be able to be notified whenever a new podcast episode comes up on there. I am going to be trying to do them on the same day. However, it is more likely that the podcast episode with video will be coming out on Monday, and then the audio will come out on the Sunday. But fingers crossed I can try and make it work and get them both out on the same day for you guys, because I think that'll be more interesting and you won't have to wait as long, so it's always better. But we're going to get right into it. I have these assumptions on my iPad and we're going to be just answering them. Some of them I have to infer a little bit because some of them aren't that specific, but fingers crossed I can get them all answered for you. They're going to be all anonymous because that's the way that I sold it to people, so if you would like to send in any assumptions or dilemmas that you have, whether it's customer dilemmas, cake dilemmas, baking dilemmas, then just send them in, because I won't be releasing any names, so then you won't have to worry that your assumption or question is being read out. So yeah, the first one that we've got is not getting any orders. This is such a common one. There's actually quite a few that say the same thing, and it's something that you will go through phases of. I definitely went through phases in the beginning. My first 6 months or so, I did go through phases of having more orders and then having less. Certain times there will be lulls in the market. It also depends on your style of baking, as well as the way that you're advertising. Quite a few different things come into it, and also things as simple as there might be more birthdays in 1 month in your area, so it's not something that you can necessarily know. You wouldn't know if that was happening, but that can sometimes be why there are less orders, especially if there's things like occasions or events that are coming up where people aren't ordering for them, but they're going to be out, so then they're not going to need to order. And also if people are going out for birthdays rather than having them in, they might be less likely to have a cake, or one that's been homemade and not shop bought. So there are so many things that come into it, but you do just have to keep pressing on. One of my main things that I always told myself, and I'm definitely glad I did, because in the beginning there were times where I was having 2 cakes a month, which at the moment would be for me very low. Now I'm having roughly 15 cakes a month, and that's like the lowest. So it does go up and down. I definitely started lower than I was now. I think a lot of people don't necessarily, if they haven't been following me from the beginning, realise that I have obviously grown as a business, and I definitely wasn't where I am now at the beginning, and I definitely didn't just start and automatically have these customers. You do have to work for it, and unfortunately it does usually take a lot of time. It's a type of business where there are a lot of people doing it, especially at the moment when we're working from home. There are a lot of bakers, so it means that the market's more saturated, and you just have to keep going and make sure that your work is unique, your work is refined and a good quality, because then people are going to want to come to you rather than someone else. And also let your personality and creativity show. A lot of people say that they love my cakes, and I don't particularly do anything that is, obviously there are certain styles that are similar to people, but I try to just do my own thing and improvise, which means that a lot of the time they do turn out different to other people's that I've seen, and it has that unique touch. So I find that people like that. They want it to be unique, they want to not necessarily have seen it before, and also it gives you your own style, which I think is very important. And if people see that you're putting out good content and all these lovely orders, just keep going with all the posting and keeping regular updates on your socials, because then customers are going to be more likely to see all of those designs that you're coming up with, your flavours, new cakes that you're doing, and then they're going to think, you know what, I want to order from them. And also the main thing is being consistent, because as soon as you start going into a lull of not posting or not being as active on socials, a lot of the time customers can either unfollow or they're not as interested, because there is always someone that's going to be posting more. There are people that post more than me, and I post quite a lot, but there's people that post more than me, and then people might think, you know what, they're posting even more than Amy is, I want to follow them instead. I mean, I like to follow people that are consistent. If I see that people aren't posting, whether it's on YouTube or Instagram, if I see that they're not posting for a while, I will unfollow, because otherwise the algorithm sends you old stuff and you'll be getting posts from a month ago. So I unfollow. And like I say, if customers see that you're doing that, then they might unfollow as well. So you want to make sure that you're being active so that people don't forget about you. So that's the main thing that I can say on not getting any orders, is just keep going, try and be unique, stick at it, and also measure the time, because I get lots of messages from people that have only been going a few months and they're saying, you know, I'm not getting many orders. And it took me at least 6 months. Something clicked in the new year, I don't quite know what, but as soon as the new year started, picked up. Everything picked up a lot more. But I think it's difficult to measure it because everyone takes different amounts of time. I think mine was helped by YouTube, but obviously every business can take a different amount of time to build up. Some are very quick, some aren't. So you just have to keep going with it. That's all that I can recommend in terms of that. There was a couple of people that said this, but they just said baking. So I'm assuming this is just dilemmas when it comes to baking. So just generally, if you're having dilemmas with your recipes, with how things are turning out, because I know there are a couple more that are in relation to how things are turning out, like recipes, then try a lot of recipes. I tried a lot before I set on the ones that I now have. Even now I try new ones, and all of the ones that I tried I had to completely adapt. None of them are as I found them, which is a lot of the time why I don't share them, because they aren't actually recipes that you can find, because a lot of them I've had to change so much because there were things that I found didn't work for me. They needed more oven time, because again, depending on what oven you have, depending on what fridge you have, those things do make a difference in terms of a recipe, because every oven performs differently. Some are more powerful than others, so some will need more time than others. So I definitely found that recipes can be so temperamental. Someone can make it and tell me that it's great, and then I can make it and it's terrible. So if it's in regards to baking dilemmas, things going wrong, recipes, try as many as you can. Read reviews before you try any, because a lot of the time you read a review, and quite a lot of recipes that I looked at, I went in the reviews after I tried them if they went wrong, and loads of people had said that they had gone wrong, but I didn't think to check. So that's definitely something that you need to be checking. But also, it's going to take a lot of trial and error. No business will get a recipe the first time. A lot of the time you do have to amend it and try and make it better and try it a couple of times. And you also want to make sure that you're doing recipes and they're working out every time, if not most times, because you don't want to be making a recipe where it's different every time and there's a lot of mistakes, because then when you do have an order, it's going to put more pressure on you, because you're going to be thinking, this recipe turns out different every time I make it, which is never good. So you want to make sure it's something that you can recreate and you can redo every time and not have any issues. Or if you do, I've had the odd one where it's gone wrong once in a blue moon and I've rebaked it and it's been perfect. It's just a bad batch. So if it's like that, then that's perfectly fine. But if it is wrong multiple times, varying factors, then you just want to make sure that it's something that you can recreate, because it just makes your life easier. You don't want to be having issues whilst you're baking, and it also costs money to be rebaking things, so which you obviously don't charge the customer for, so you don't want to be losing money by having to rebake things. That's all I can say on that one, because it isn't very specific, so I didn't sort of know what they wanted me to cover. The next one is stress on not getting buttercream colours right, or if the cupcakes or cakes are raw. So we're going to talk about colours first. Colours can be very hit and miss. I've been doing this for a year and even I haven't mastered things like red and black. Most of the time they work, but there are times where they are hit and miss in terms of their colour. It's very difficult to match colours where people send you a photo because obviously you don't know what colour they've used. So I would say if it is a specific colour, always recommend that you can't necessarily get it perfect, because I sometimes say that if someone sends me like a blue cake, I might say I can't guarantee that it's going to be exactly that colour because I don't know what they've used, but I will try and get it as close a match as possible. So always put a little disclaimer on it, I think, because otherwise you're going to be setting yourself up for failure. And in terms of things like red, black, which are I think the main ones that people struggle with, a lot of these colours need time. Navy is also another one, and forest green, because I've used those recently. They need time. So what you need to do is add a tablespoon of colour and then make sure that you, and that's like a flat tablespoon, and make sure that you mix it all and then you leave it. It needs to go in the fridge. They develop best in the fridge. Some people have tried the microwaving method. I personally can't get on with it. I find that they just separate, and I've tried all of the remixing techniques and they just, once they're separated, they just won't combine again. That's the butter and the icing sugar. So I find that I do the fridge method because then it's not separated, it's just being made harder, the buttercream, and then when you take it out you can leave it at room temperature, it softens, and then you can re-whip it. So I leave it in there sometimes overnight for colours like black and red. Red usually takes a lot longer than black, and I find with black I add a little bit of cocoa powder ideally. But if it is a vanilla cake where you can't add any cocoa powder, then just make sure that you've added your colour, you put it in the fridge. I leave it for sometimes a couple of hours, and then I take it out, bring it to room temperature. If it is really hard and you can't mix it and it's just not coming back to room temperature, then I would say put it in the microwave for 10 seconds, no more than that. I find that if I do it for any longer than that, it separates. And that is even if it's multiple times. Some people say to do the microwaving method where you do it 10 seconds at a time, but I find anything longer than 10 seconds it separates. But that's just me. So I always recommend doing it with the fridge, letting it develop in there, and then I take it out and re-whip, and if you can't re-whip then I put it in the microwave for 5 to 10 seconds and I give it a mix, and that is perfect. So that's all I can recommend on the colouring. Also, where you're buying your colourings from, never buy from a supermarket because they are water-based, so the strength of the colour is terrible. Ideally, I'd recommend Colour Splash, Colour Mill, Pro Gel. I sometimes use Wilton, but not very much, and I have Sugar Flare for red, black and white colourings. But I do also recommend the Colour Splash Red. It is very, very good. I sometimes use that more than Sugar Flare, so that's another one that I'd recommend. And these can all be bought from places like Hobbycraft, Amazon, anywhere like that. They're very easy to source. Colour Mill I either buy off Amazon or Cake Decorating Co because it's a little bit harder to find and they're usually out of stock, but I would definitely recommend those colours. In regards to cupcakes or cakes being raw, make sure that your oven is at the right temperature. I've never had this issue where they're raw. I usually have it that I've left them in too long, but I don't really get that anymore. I don't think I've had that for a while. Cupcakes seem to just turn out perfect every time. I think it's just my luck with them. Cakes, sometimes I'll put a tester in and I think, you know what, I think that needs a little bit longer, but I've never actually taken it out, cut it and it be raw as like a final product. It's only that I might have checked it, opened the door on the oven, put a skewer in and felt like it needed a little bit more. It's still wobbling a little bit. So yeah, I never take it out unless I am sure, because obviously once it's out the oven it can't go back in, and that's another thing, do not put anything back in the oven, because once it has gone down in temperature then it is like cooking something that is already cooked. So like if you were to cook chicken, then you were to reheat it in a microwave, that reheating you're not meant to do. It's not food safe, and you could give someone like food poisoning, so you definitely shouldn't do that. So I don't put anything back in the oven. If it's out and it's raw, you obviously have to throw it away. It can't go back in. But I would say use a skewer method, because they shouldn't be raw. They shouldn't come out raw if you're doing that. So I would put them in for the recommended time of your recipe. I have adapted all of mine. Mine is usually longer than the recipe says. I think it's because my oven's a little bit old, so it's not as powerful. Whereas if you're using like a new oven or it's an industrial one, then you might find it's more powerful, so you need it to leave it in for less time. It just depends. But I find that I leave mine in, say it says 28 minutes, I'll do that, and I do it for a couple of minutes less than I need, just so that I can test it. And then I open the door, use a skewer, and if it comes out clean, then that's fine. I also make sure that it's not wobbly before I even open the door, because if it's wobbly and you open the door, then sometimes they will sink. They don't usually sink very much unless they are like really, really raw. But usually you might open the door, it's a little bit wobbly, it will just flatten slightly rather than being, you know, like a peak. And then you can skewer it, you can see that it's either raw or it's not raw, and then you can either leave it in or take it out. But I sometimes tap on the oven door. Sounds really weird, but whilst the oven door is closed, I sometimes tap on the door, and because that sends like a vibration in the oven, then you can see if the cakes wobble, and if they wobble, then I don't bother opening the door. I usually do 3 to 5 minutes longer. It depends how high you're filling your tins, and also what size they are. I find 4 and 6 inch cakes need longer than my 8, because my 8 is thinner, and the 6 inch cakes don't need as long as the 4 inch. They usually go around what I've written on the recipe. The 8 inch sometimes needs a few minutes less than the recipe says, because they are thinner layers. It just depends. But try not to fill your tins too high, because that will affect how long they take to cook. Sometimes 4 inch cakes can take 40 minutes, whereas a 6 or an 8 inch can take 25 to 30. It just depends. But yeah, I would definitely recommend not filling them too high, and just making sure you do those checks before you take them out. If you're screwing it, you shouldn't have any issues, because you're not going to be taking it out when it's raw. There's also some recipes where they do remain quite wet. I mean, I don't personally use a chocolate recipe that does that. There's some chocolate recipes where they're quite fudgy, so they will remain quite wet, and some people mistake it for being undercooked when it's not. It's just where if you've got grated chocolate in a cake, then it's going to have wetness. And also like my Biscoff recipe, because it has biscuits in it, I find that it does have little pockets of moisture. It's not undercooked, it's just where the biscuit is in it, the crumbs from the biscuit, and they are remaining soft, so then it can sometimes create wetness in your cake. I don't think it would be a first podcast if we didn't have any technical difficulties. So my battery just ran out, but luckily we had a spare, so we're going to get right back into it. So the next one is pricing. She said you can't please everyone. So this is very, very important. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to appease the people. Obviously, if someone told me that I could have a cake for £20 or I could have one for £50 and I wasn't in the industry, I would say, well, obviously, I'll go for the £20 one, if they didn't necessarily show me the difference in skill. Because a lot of people don't necessarily understand the difference. They just see a cake and assume that anyone can do it. If they just send you a photo, they say, well, can you do this? I know definitely when I was starting out, people would send me cakes which were way above what I was doing, but they just assumed that I could do it. And I would tell them, well, I can do this, but I need to change this, that, and the next thing. And sometimes they would just expect you to be able to do whatever they wanted, and it doesn't work like that. And also, they want you to do whatever they want and not pay the price for it. But it does get easier, and I think that a lot of the time you earn people's respect. A lot of the time now, I send someone a quote and they don't even argue, they just pay it. It definitely didn't start out like that. I would send people quotes and they either wouldn't get back to me, or they'd come back and say how expensive it was. And if I'm completely honest, I'd rather someone just ignore it, rather than try and kind of like put a downer on my business, by saying, you know, oh, I don't think it's worth that much. And it's like, well, if you don't think it's worth that much, then go to Tesco's and buy one for £10. But I mean, I look at the ones in Tesco's, and before I was a baker, I never used to even acknowledge them, or I just wouldn't think anything of it. I think it's a cake in Tesco's. But now I look at them and I think, one, all the preservatives in that cake to mean that it can just sit there, because my cakes definitely can't just sit on a shelf in a shop, not refrigerated, and survive. And also the skill. You look at them and, you know, props to the person that is making them, because mass producing cakes is not something that I would want to do. It is not enjoyable. It's, you know, you're just mass producing the same thing over and over again. So there's no creative aspect to it. But the thing is, they don't have the skill to be doing it to a high standard. The reason those cakes are £15 is, one, because of the ingredients that they're using, because the supermarket is probably getting them cheap, because they sell the ingredients, so they can then use their own ingredients that they source cheaply to provide to their bakers to make their cakes. Not only that, the standard that they are finished to isn't the same as one of my cakes, and also the time that is spent on them. I might spend 3 hours on mine, they're spending 1 hour, and they're frozen sponges, they're probably packed with preservatives, or you can see that they are from the ingredients list, and they're just not very, it sounds horrible, nice tasting cakes. Every time I've had a supermarket cake, you can definitely tell the difference to a homemade one, whereas a individual might not notice that, but as a baker you can definitely tell the difference, and I always find it when I'm ever making cakes, and then if I try one that, if I go to, like, say I go to a party and someone's bought a cake, I can always tell the difference, just because it's so easy to tell when something is fresh and when something isn't. But yeah, I think you just need to stick to your guns. Have educated prices, make sure that you do know that you are worth that much, base it on your skill. If you are lower in skill, then charge less. If you are higher in skill, then make sure you charge what you're worth. Charge based on your ingredients. I know how much my ingredients cost, how much my boards cost, my boxes, etc. So make sure that you're factoring all of that into it, and then it means that if you tell someone that the cake is £40, then you know that even if they say it's too expensive, you know that it's not, because you're covering all of your costs, you're covering your labour, you're covering all your expenses, and you know that you've worked out those figures. Whereas if you are doing educated guesses where it's more of a rounded number, or you haven't worked it out exactly, then someone says it's expensive, you might think, you know what, shall I re-go over it and make sure that it's correct? So just make sure that you've got all your figures correct before you're telling people prices. Also, don't follow what other people say. There are so many people where I've seen them and they just say, oh, it's this much, and I think to myself, I wouldn't be able to make a cake for that much, like that particular design, because on all these cake pricing forums and things like that on Facebook, everyone says, oh, I think this cake is worth this, I think it's worth this, oh, I would only charge that, that's too much. And the problem with that is, the point is, everyone is different based on your skill set, based on your area, where you get your ingredients from, the prices will differ, so it all depends on you as an individual. But make sure that you're charging what you're worth rather than what you think people want. The moment you stop doing that and you're confident in your prices, I think people will definitely notice the difference, and be able to think, look, she's confident in her prices, she knows what she's talking about. Whereas if you don't sound confident in your prices, then people might not want to pay those. So pricing is very, very difficult, but yeah, I think it's definitely possible to get it right. I feel like mine's pretty correct. I've never had any issues this year so far, with people telling me it's too overpriced, and that goes for wedding cakes as well. So I think I've managed to get my pricing down to a T as to what I want it currently. I'm definitely going to increase it slightly at the end of the year, which is just natural inflation each year as a business, as your skill set goes up and you have more experience. But I don't think anyone will have any issues with that, because the standard that I'm producing is good enough for that. But yeah, just stick to your guns, make sure that you've researched your prices, and just keep going. That's all I can really say on pricing. It's very, very difficult because it's really hard not to want to be a people pleaser, but the problem is, it's better to do one cake that is worth £60 or even more, and you've spent 3 hours on it, than do 3 cakes for £20 to please people, and you end up spending 3 hours on each and getting the same amount of money. You want to be capitalising off of something rather than making it for minimum wage and spending more time doing that than you would doing something that is worth more. So yeah, just definitely make sure that you are getting what you're worth. I actually did a video on pricing. I am doing an updated one, but if you look on my YouTube, there is a video on pricing which would hopefully help you. But I will be doing updated ones for weddings as well, because I haven't done one on weddings so far. I'm going to just kind of mention this because it's very similar to what we've just gone over, but someone said pricing cakes and not feeling super guilty for asking for the amount that you're actually worth. What you need to think about when pricing cakes is that people will pay an amount for a cake. Some people are happy to pay an amount for a cake, but if those people aren't happy to pay, think to yourself what you would spend that money on that isn't a small business who is putting a lot of hard work and time into something like a service. Because if you think about, I don't know, say a cake for example that is £70, because I mean some of mine, my most popular ones are typically between £60 and £80, and I could easily spend that same amount of money on a few items of clothing that I don't need, or I could spend it on taxis, trains, like transport. You could spend it on a day out. You could spend it on food. I am terrible for spending loads of money on food, and those are all things that are just being spent without even thinking about it. You don't spend that money and think, oh, should I be spending that money? Whereas as soon as it comes to people paying a small business, they're thinking, how cheap can I get this item? So you just have to stick to your guns when it comes to pricing, because all you've got to think about is if they can't afford a homemade, personalised, creative cake, then they can go to Tesco's and get one for £10 to £15. But if you want something that is completely personalised, completely custom, and you don't have the money for it, then unfortunately you shouldn't be coming to a small business and trying to get it cheap when they are going to put a lot of time and effort into it. That's all I can say on that, because I just think that if people can't pay for the service that they want, then they shouldn't be wanting it, if that makes sense. It's like wanting an expensive car but only wanting to pay, I don't know, £1,000 for it. It's like, if you don't have the money for that expensive car, then you shouldn't buy it. And as brutal as that sounds, it is the harsh truth. And as a small business, you need to remember that you are worth a certain amount, and it isn't your job to give people stuff basically for free. Because people that do cakes for £20 or £30, the ingredients on some of those cakes are so expensive, and all the time and external things like boards, boxes, that will almost bring you up to that value, which means that you've basically done that for free, which makes it just not worth it. So just make sure that you are charging what you're worth. The next thing, which is very funny, and this is what I was on about when I say if you want to submit customer dilemmas, is how rude people can be when they message you. And I think people, again, don't seem to realise when they're talking to small businesses that you should actually treat them the same as you treat anyone else. People seem to think that they can be really rude, especially when it comes to pricing, and they say, well, I don't think you're worth that, which is very rude. If someone told them that they weren't worth the wages that they earn, then I'm sure they'd be quite offended. But when it comes to small businesses, typically people just say whatever they want and expect you to take it on the chin and not be offended by it. And it's very hard not to be. In the beginning, I used to get quite offended because people would be quite rude. Now I just reply with an overly polite message, because then if they wanted to write a bad review, then I've got the messages to prove that I was perfectly polite and I didn't cause an issue. So just make sure you stay professional and you just don't take any notice of it. The messages, I think, do get better. I don't get rude messages anymore, and that is because if someone inquires about a cake, the first thing that I say, I don't even acknowledge the fact that they want me to discuss a design. I have a set message that I send to everyone, and it just says, thanks for the inquiry, here's my prices and my flavour list. If you would like further details, please let me know. And that is so that I don't go through and waste time discussing with someone and then I find that they either don't have the budget for my cakes or they are just time wasters. So I just make sure that I am putting my prices out there very early on so that if they don't have the money, then they don't have to buy from me, they can go to someone else. But if they do want to buy from me, then they know how much they're roughly getting themselves in for before we even discuss designs. And that is basically a message that says 6-inch starting from this much, 8-inch starting from this much, and it means that they can look at it and go, well, I wanted an 8-inch, but I'm not going to get it from you for anything around £40, so I'm going to have to go somewhere else. It's just easy to sort of weed out the people that don't have the budget for your items. So I would definitely recommend doing that, because I used to say, oh, what are you looking for, da 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 da, and go through this kind of process of messaging and then realise that they have a very small budget. In regards to people being rude, just if someone says anything rude to you, just say, I'm sorry that you feel that way, I suggest that you go and find someone else, or just acknowledge the message but just brush it off. It's not worth engaging, and a lot of the time people are being rude because they want a reaction, because then they can say that you're a horrible business. So if people are rude to you, then just come back with something overly polite, and then you know that you haven't been out of line at all. The next thing is spending time creating new recipes versus perfecting current recipes. I'm not sure if you mean perfecting your own recipes, or wanting to try new ones of your own, or if you mean perfecting one that already exists. I'm assuming that you mean your own. I think it's good to be good at a few things before you... It's quality over quantity. So you want to make sure that the quality of the few things that you have is better than the amount that you have. You don't want to have too many different flavours that you can't keep up with, and that aren't very good. So I only started with chocolate, vanilla, and I think it was Biscoff, like literally like 3 flavours. Then I went to white chocolate and raspberry, and then I started doing double chocolate, which was white and milk chocolate buttercream, and then now I do chocolate orange, I do chocolate Nutella, I do lemon, I do strawberry icing. There's quite a few different ones that I do now. It's between 10 and 15 different flavours, but I definitely didn't start with that many. I literally, for the first 6 months of my business, I had 3 flavours and that was it. And I think it's good to build up that customer base and have good products rather than trying lots of things and not being as good at lots of things. So I would say make sure that you've perfected roughly like 3 to 5 of your current recipes, and then spend time on new ones, and make sure that you perfect a recipe before starting a new one. So you're saying that you want to spend time creating new recipes, that's obviously multiple. So I would say perfect a recipe at a time. Do a new flavour at a time, a new product at a time. If that's a rocky road, if it's a brownie, do one thing at a time, and once you've perfected that and then you've noted it down as a good recipe, then move on to the next one, because otherwise you can kind of just get lost in all of these recipes, and then you might find that none of them are consistent, none of them are able to be recreated every single time exactly the same, because you've just got so many that you're trying. So yeah, I would definitely say focus on a few so that you have a menu, and then once you've got a solid menu of a few things, then you can start trying out new ones, but make sure you do them one at a time. The next one is how to do taxes. Do you do them all at once or a bit at a time? So with your tax return, it's a yearly thing, so you do that once, so that is all in one go. So I need to do my tax return, so based on when I registered, it depends when you register, I've got until January to send mine in, because of the year that I registered. If you were registered before last year, then you would have had to do it by the January this year. So yeah, that is a very time consuming thing that I currently don't have time to be doing. which is probably why you're asking this question, but I would say to keep all of your receipts and have a log of all of your orders and invoices. Have that as a rolling thing, so do that a bit at a time so that you don't have to do it later on and have a lot to do, but the tax return you will do all in one go. So I think that answers your question in regards to doing them all at once and a bit at a time, is that your tax return is all in one go, but all of the receipts and everything that you want to keep. A few people mentioned in one of my videos, it was an old video, but they said, oh, I didn't realise you had to keep receipts. You don't have to keep receipts, but the program that I am going to be using for my tax return, I think it's QuickBooks. You upload your bank statements and then you select like Tesco's or Cake Decorating Co, and you'll select transactions, and then you can select how much of that £100 was business and how much of it was personal. So if I don't have those receipts, I don't know if that is all business or if it's all personal. So that's the reason I keep the receipts. But if you know that your transactions are solely business or solely personal, like if you do separate food shops for business ingredients and then separate ones for home, then obviously you'll be able to tell. I can never do that because I don't have enough time to do 2 separate trips, so I always do one and then just be able to separate the expenses, but it just depends. But yeah, like I say, I just keep the receipts for that sense, that you can be able to go through and log all of the information. So this one is very common, and it is frustrating. So how do you deal with late collections? Do you get stressed when waiting around to have stuff collected? It is very frustrating. As much as I do very little deliveries now, I only do deliveries if I know people can't get to me. So quite a few of my regulars, if they don't have a car, then I know that I'm not going to make them carry a cake or like get a lift or something. So I deliver it because I know that they don't have the means to come and collect it. But if people are able to come and collect, if I know that they drive, then I will suggest collection as like a base, like a blanket thing, just because it's easier for me. However, I do find that if you are planning to go out, then it can be a pain because you do have to wait around if people are late. I do set hour times, so I will say like 1, 2, 3 p.m. and you have to pick one, and then if you are late I will send you a message just to get an update, because obviously I could be going out. 9 times out of 10 people let me know if they're going to be late. I've only had like 1 or 2 people where they've been late, but they have let me know before to say, can I come at 1:30 instead of on the dot, and I've said that's fine, and then I carry on doing what I'm doing. A lot of the time it's very rare that I need to go out, so I plan all my collections ideally around the same time so that I know in the afternoon I don't have to think about them. But sometimes I think the collections are good because then it means you don't have to worry about traffic, anything like that, which obviously takes time. I had a delivery recently and it's half an hour away, but it ended up taking me less time because of traffic. But that's something where I planned my collection for later because I thought, oh, I'm not going to be back in time after this delivery, but then it turned out it was fine. So deliveries can be worse because obviously you're having to go out, so then that's more of a chore, and typically the delivery charge doesn't cover the actual effort of having to deliver something. But with collections, I would just be strict on collection times. Make sure that people know that they have to come at that time, and if they don't, then you expect a text to let you know when they're going to be coming, and that they're going to be late, and just send people a reminder. If people are late, then just say, hi, I'm busy, I've got things to do, so please can you confirm when you will be collecting, as I haven't heard from you or you're late. Some people charge a late fee. I don't. It's something that I might introduce if it was actually a problem, but typically I don't have any issues, so I wouldn't feel the need. But I do know some bakers that charge a fee if anyone is late, just because they obviously have more of a schedule outside of home, so they can't be at home waiting. Like if they've got kids and they've got to do school runs and things like that, then they can't have people turning up late. But luckily I am home all day anyway, so if someone is late, then I usually just accommodate it. But yeah, it can definitely be stressful or sort of annoying. I never let anyone come earlier than they've agreed, because obviously I've made a cake plan and baked all the cakes for the times that I know that they're due. So if someone is meant to be collecting in the evening and they say, oh, can I collect at 1, then if it's not ready, I'll just say no, and they'll have to just come when they've confirmed that they're coming. So make sure you stick to your guns in that sense, because that can be stressful for you, and also it's not necessarily your fault that they want to come earlier, but it also gives you extra stress to try and get something done. So the last one is, what cleaning supplies have to be British standards? Most don't have it on the label. So I definitely know that a lot of them don't have it on the label. Things like hand wash, your sprays that you use on your surfaces where you have food, I don't think floor cleaner does, but the one that I only use on non-baking days, and my mop has its own fluid, so I don't know whether I need to check the back. I'd have to check the back, but as far as I'm aware, floor cleaner doesn't have to be. So it's just surfaces that food is on, and like what you're washing up with, because obviously what you wash up your utensils with, they're going to be used to make the food, so they're going to be coming into contact. Whereas you'd assume that your floor isn't coming into contact with your food, so that isn't so much of an issue. And things like any deep cleaners, because I mentioned this to my inspector, because I said obviously there's certain things like grease cleaners for ovens where they're like deep cleaners, they aren't. So I said if I use them on non-baking days and then the kitchen is aired out, or you re-wipe it down with a damp cloth to just get any excess of the product off, then that's fine. So that's what they advised me, because I said that there's a grease cleaner that I use for the oven just to get any excess grease off the base, and then also I like to use the Zoflora, which is I use that on the floors sometimes, and sometimes on the worktops, but very rarely. Usually it's in the main kitchen, not in my area, but that isn't, because I think it's because it's so potent. I don't know if people don't know what it is. It's kind of like a fragrance that you mix with hot water, and then you can clean the sides with it, but it leaves a nice fragrance on the sides, and it's more of a concentrated product. But yeah, I don't use any of those on baking days, because obviously then they're not going to have time to be aired out or be re-wiped down. But usually I use those to clean, and that's like as a base clean, if that makes sense, and then I would go over it with my sprays, which are British standards. But yeah, like hand wash, because obviously you're going to be handling food, so then it needs to be British standards because you're handling it. Things that you're washing up with, so like washing up liquid, and then your sprays for surfaces, because again, food could be touching that. But as far as I'm aware, floors don't need to be. And also, I would assume fridges, I only use my sprays for the fridge because there is food in there. So they're the British standards ones that I use for the surfaces. I also use those in the fridge. And I get mine from Aldi and Lidl, because the Astonish ones that aren't fragrance, the Astonish bottles, they are British standards. So I usually use those because I find it's nice and cheap, it's easy to buy because it's like accessible. I have one that's local, and it's like a big bottle. So yeah, that's usually the one that I use. But yeah, I think that covers everything, but I know that a lot of things don't put it on it. Sometimes if you Google them, it does say it online, then it might be, but it might not be on the bottle, or it isn't suitable and that's why it's not on the bottle. So sometimes you can Google them to see whether they're suitable. But yeah, I think that is everything. So I hope that that was interesting, and I hope that people found that useful. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, and if you are listening on Spotify, then I hope that you have followed the podcast and you found it interesting. This will be going up before I go on holiday, and then I'm going to Weymouth for the week, so there will be some uploads on YouTube because I've pre-filmed them, but then if you want to go and follow my Instagram, then you'll see some of my holiday updates. So my personal Instagram is Amy Victoria Page, and that's Page without an I. And then my baking one is Sweet Things by Amy. So if you're nosy and you want to have a look at my holiday content, then feel free to go and follow me. And if you're not worried, then just thank you for watching. Make sure you gave it a thumbs up and subscribed, and I will see you in my next video. So yeah, I will be doing this again very, very soon. So make sure to check out my Instagram because that's where I'll be putting up any polls if I want some more dilemmas for another episode. So yeah, I will see you in my next video. Bye!